Hello, everyone. Say anything to anybody?
Hello.
Hi, everybody. Peace. Today we're talking with Darryl Robert Schoon. Specifically, I wanted to ask him what he thought about housing and mortgages because we haven't specifically addressed that before, and he has some very definite opinions. All right, enough of my rambling. On to the video. Peace. Back when we first connected, the fellow who put us in, put the bug in my ear to contact you had told me that what he was struck by is how you talked about mortgages and housing. And I don't think we've ever talked about that before. So I was curious now in 2022, what your view towards mortgages and what your view on what's going on with housing is right now.
People don't understand. I mean, they understand houses. They understand buying, selling, what you put a down payment, zero down, 5% down, 10% down, and you get this big fat mortgage and you pay this off over 30 years and you get a house. Okay. And when I wrote my book, Time of the Vulture, 2007, predicted an economic collapse. 2007 was really at the height of the subprime bubble. Okay. I knew it was going to collapse. How did I know? Because the Fed had started raising interest rates in 2006. And I knew that housing, it was a bubble, an enormous bubble. You had kids with a job at Circle K being given $250,000 loan, a loan that the bankers would never have given them 3 years before. Money was being handed out like popcorn at the matinee.
Yeah, and
And
I
it
saw an article
never,
today that Freddie and Fannie Mae, they upped their limit to $750,000 now.
yeah, the back mortgages, million. It's going to million. All right. What and so I understood why it was going to collapse because they were raising interest rates. And the only reason that the bubble had gotten that big is they had cheap interest rates. And I knew though that the only reason they had cheap interest rates was after the dot-com 2000 bubble collapsed, things cracked. And they needed to start their credit and debt engine again. So they lowered interest rates to basically nothing, 1%, 2%, and started handing out mortgages to anybody who had never qualified previously. Now, why would they do that? Because the system was in trouble. The system itself, unless they got credit flowing again, was going to go nowhere. Now, that's how I knew. And that's how I knew a year ago it was going to happen again. I wrote an article in March of this year called The Ides of March, saying basically it's going to fall apart again right now because I knew that inflation was moving so fast and so high that the Fed had to do something. The Fed was being forced to move in and pop the bubble. Now everybody goes, "Oh, this is horrible. Why are they doing this to us? They know it's going to cause us pain. We're going to lose our houses. We're going to lose this. Why is it doing? Why are they doing it?" The Fed is trapped. And because the Fed is trapped, we're trapped. Because we're trapped by the same thing. All of us are like little hamsters in that little mill of credit debt. And when that goes, everything goes. That hamster mill, a running thing of credit debt, is what we call capitalism. Everybody thinks, oh, capitalism, free markets, free markets. That's bullshit. That's bullshit. Capitalism isn't free markets. Free markets existed before capitalism. Capitalism is the introduction of money in the form of credit. And the flip side of that is debt. That never existed until the early 1800s, 1700s in England with the Bank of England, when money became debt. And then when England started running out of room to expand their Ponzi scheme, they brought it over to the United States and they gave it to us. That's like that's like giving somebody syphilis. You know, the screwing made me feel good in bed. And that's where we are now. What people don't understand about credit debt and about houses and mortgages is that this didn't even exist in our world until the 1930s. Let me tell you that. When the bankers started loaning people money, the only ones who got loans were the government and big corporations and farmers. Why? Because they knew that farmland, you always needed it. So they'd give a loan to a farmer out there. And I mean, I knew the guy, some guy I met him. He was in the banking business in Texas. And you know what he said they did? He said, well, we're sort of farmers too. We farm the farmers. They gave him loans to go out there and grow watermelons and do whatever. And they knew in the next 10 years, some drought would come along and the farmers would be gone. And they'd repossess the farms and they'd loan them out again. That's what they were doing. Farmers were farming oats, wheats, cattle, whatever they were, watermelons, and they were farming the farmers. That's what the bankers were doing.
Well, and now they farm us.
Yeah. Well, the bankers in the 1930s wouldn't even give you a loan to buy a house. Who was buying the homes before the 1930s? The rich people who either were farmers, who had big farms, or corporations that they could get the money from. They wouldn't give it. They wouldn't even give an auto loan. Why? That's why Henry Ford hated bankers. And he started loaning money to people to buy his cars. That's what GMAC came from, to loan people directly to buy their cars. But now, a car loan, yeah, everybody gets a car loan. Housing loan, yeah.
Yeah.
You know why they got loose with that? Because their system collapsed in the 1930s, and they had to sucker the rest in, or their game was going to collapse. And the sucker game was the FDIC. The sucker game was housing, mortgages, gave everybody a loan. And you know how that loan's paid back? That loan's paid back when you get that loan because you want to buy a house. For the first 10 years, 90% of that loan doesn't go to reducing your fucking mortgage.
That's right.
90% of that loan goes to paying the interest. And the mortgage doesn't go down. The bank that loans you that money is going to take his off the top. Off the top. And leave you with a chain on your ankle to pay that off for the next 30 years. And if you're lucky, inflation is going to make the value of that house go up, and you're going to be able to get out of the house and turn it over to some other poor soul who's going to be owning it when the bottom falls out. And this is where we are today. The bottom is about to fall out big time, not only on crypto, which it already has, not only on the banking system, which it will be, not only in stocks, and that's only started, but on housing. And this is true not only in the United States, this is true in China, this is true in Europe, this is true in South America, this is true all around the world, because housing bubbles have become commonplace. And the game is over. So you wanted to know about houses? You wanted to know about mortgages? That's it. At least, I don't know if that's it. That's my view.
Well, the bankers definitely love to have you buy and sell every 10 years for that reason.
Absolutely. The bankers own the casino. They don't care if you want to come in and play craps, or if your favorite game is 21, or if you're a high roller and you like Baccarat, or you like poker. They don't care. They just want you in the house playing with their chips. They keep taking it off the top. And they are so much a part of the economy. That's why they got bailed out by the Fed and the government when everything went down. When everything went down in 2000, 2008, they got bailed out. Why? Just wrote a book called Docking at the Mothership, which came out 3 weeks ago. A positive view of the economic crisis. Because I believe that until the bankers go down, we're screwed. We're screwed. We are like debt slaves on the bankers' plantation, and we know the banker's in trouble. And the banker's is gone to London to get a refi on the plantation. And here we are. We're slaves on that plantation. They're selling our kids at auction once a month. Once a month.
Mm-hmm.
We got chains around us at night.
Mm-hmm.
They'll shoot us if we leave the plantation.
Yeah,
And we are
so
screwed up that we're praying to Massa. We're praying to God that Massa gets a refi so the plantation can keep going.
So yeah, so slavery never really did go away. It's just kind of been repackaged, hasn't it?
Oh, it's now that slavery did go away. Thank God. If you were black.
Right.
That was fucked.
Right.
We can't even imagine taking our kids and having them sold off.
Mm-hmm.
We can't imagine it. And yet, for a vast percentage of our population, it was real. And there are people still wanting to bring it back. Still wanting to bring it back. They were living good. All those Southern Baptists with little crappy churches talking about God and shaming everybody else. They went to church and they prayed, and they only turned against slavery 10, 15, 20 years ago. When they said, oops, my bad. Fuck you. Fuck them. You know? But in the bigger game, we always have been slaves, to debt slaves, since the introduction of debt as money. And some of us did pretty well in it. Some of us did better than others.
Well, if you get in early, you stand a better chance of doing well.
Absolutely. With any Ponzi scheme, if you get in early, you're all right. Well, who got in early? You had to be white, you had to be male, and it had to be in the early 19th century. All right? And now, if you're white, you're male, it's too late. You're gaming. You're like everybody else. You're in the drink with all those other people who weren't in the game early. Because the only ones who have anything now are the bankers and the people who were in early. And you know what? You know why my book, Talking to the Vulture, Talking to the Mothership, is a positive view of the economic crisis? Because like those hippies, I believe, this crisis is going to take all those people out. It's going to flip over, and finally, we're all going to get a chance at the world that is ours. Because it wasn't created for them. They just took it over.
But they're not going to willingly give up. They're not going to willingly let go.
Of course they aren't going to willingly give up. But willingly doesn't mean anything when you're bankrupt.
Well, won't they start a war?
Fuck them. Fuck their war. They've already started a war. And the war is against us. It ain't going to work. Who are they going to start a war against? Ecuador? Cuba? Us? No. They'd love to. If they would do anything to get their game to start up again. They are in the last stages of trying to restart their Ponzi scheme, and it's sputtering. It's like a flooded engine, and people are going, pour more water in, pour more gas in, pour more gas. And you know what? We know it ain't working.
So are you alluding to
the American dream?
Are you alluding to, Darryl, and maybe, because I had technical difficulties earlier, you're not alluding to in any way, shape, or form the reset that's to come, are you?
That's bullshit. I want to tell you about the fucking reset. There is a reset coming, but it ain't the one they're in control of.
Well, right. That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying.
I want to stress this, Dan. For those who have no power, which is all of us, the three of us on the screen.
The bulk of us.
I mean, we got
the bulk of humanity,
but
right?
not at the level they think. When you have no power, you think other people are in control. Now, let me tell you something. That's another superstition. They're not in control. They have more power, but they're not in control. No one is in control. No one. This is like a school bus that the brakes are off and we're headed down, and we're sitting in the back of the bus. We're not driving, and we think the guy who's got his hands on the steering wheel and the bus company is in control.
But the steering wheel's broken, right?
It's broken.
And the brakes too?
And the brakes are cut.
Oh man.
And I'm that
we
nasty
are
little kid
screwed.
at the back going, you know what? Fuck it. This thing's gonna hit, and we're gonna be better off for it.
Ooh, baby. You really think that's the analogy?
Absolutely. Because I believe that
Wow.
there is a universal force. There is something bigger than the bankers. There is something bigger than all the governments, and it's what gave us life. You know, my friend Marshall, who I went to law school with, who almost got kicked out, became very close to Bucky Fuller at the end of Bucky's life. All right? Very close. Now, Buckminster Fuller was known because he went on the world. He said, there's enough for everybody. Everybody loved Bucky, this little guy, you know, like a visionary. All right, visionary. Bucky, there's enough for everybody. That geodesic dome, all this stuff. All right? And I thought, yeah, sounds good, but he's just an idealist. Well, finally, in 2008, I was forced to read The Critical Path because of Marshall. He had all of us in one of these PDN meetings, and he gave us sections of Bucky. And Bucky had died in 1981. All right? Bucky died in 1981. But finally, I read Critical Path. And Marshall had known about it for years. Martha was at a seminar with Bucky the week he died. I knew who he was. I sat in the room, but I was running way too fast for Bucky then to slow down and read it. So in 2008, I'm reading Bucky's Fuller's Critical Path. And the introduction to Critical Path, 1981, was titled Twilight of the World's Power Structures. Twilight of the World's Power Structures.
Oh, wow.
Okay? And he said that humanity was entering an unprecedented crisis. The purpose was to transform humanity. It was a crisis that was universally intended to transform humanity from its present different culture, different speaking, different credoed, fragmentary cells into a whole harmonious group that would have a level of abundance never before achieved. He said humanity at that time, there was already enough knowledge available for us to live together with more than enough.
Tons of knowledge.
But that knowledge was being held back by the corporations and by the governments and by the religions who all lived off our belief in scarcity. He said this crisis was going to be unprecedented. And I talked to Marshall. Marshall hated the shit I was saying because he just saw this dark. And I said, Marshall, you knew Bucky. He was your bud. You were close to him. Marshall told me that he sat down with Bucky once, and it was at the full moon or new moon, and Bucky gave all his money away. He did it every month. Every month.
Wow.
All his money. And Marshall said Bucky did it because he knew that he had a relationship with the universe, with what we call God. And it wasn't the God that the people think, Southern Baptist or, the Muslim, whatever. Everything is a little God in a box that they inherited from the past. What happened to Bucky transformed him, and very few people knew it. But it's out there. The story's out there. Bucky was brilliant. He was born in a New England family. He was the fifth generation to go to Harvard. His great-great-great-grandfather had gone to Harvard and was one of the originals at the Constitution delegation.
Oh, wow.
And he wouldn't sign it.
Really?
He refused to sign it because it did not disallow slavery.
Right,
Yeah,
well, that's true.
We discussed this in our very first video.
That's a good
Yeah.
point. And
He
and
just-
it talks about how they're 3/5 of a person. Isn't that
Absolutely.
something?
And he
Yeah.
wouldn't sign it. All right. His kid, of course, goes to Harvard. And he got in trouble and almost kicked out because he led these student protests about being required to sit up straight at dinner and say prayers.
Hmm.
So Bucky came from a long heritage of rebellious Americans for freedom. All right. Well, so what happens? He goes to Harvard and he gets kicked out. Why? Because they wouldn't accept him from any of the drinking societies. Bucky was 5'2". He had hearing problems, thick glasses. Not your frat man. Not the kind of guys who at SIG up who like, or 5 minute crap. Fuck you, Not a Harvard man. Harvard. Doesn't look a Harvard man to me.
Harvard.
Not the Harvard man that I want to look like.
He
You
didn't
understand
have
me?
the proper pedigree.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So Bucky just took all that money that the family had raised for him and went to New York and spent it on showgirls. He did that the next when they let him back in, and they kicked him out again. This time for cause. Harvard University kicked Bucky out for cause on moral reasons.
Yeah.
They later ate their words
Wow.
and read him back in. But what changed Bucky was this. What changed Bucky was this. He grew up. He was a parent during the last Spanish flu, like our last COVID thing. That was an epidemic, just like this. Okay? Swept through, killed millions of people.
Yeah, and it
Right?
killed his daughter.
His daughter was born, born during that time. She had born very sickly. All right. And she was like 3 or 4 years old. And Bucky was going to the Harvard Yale game. And he went to the game and they were at the train station and all those guys had those pennants, Harvard, Yale, things. And his daughter goes, "Daddy, will you bring me a cane?" Because they were on canes. Like, "Bring me a cane." He goes, yeah, I will. So Bucky goes to the game. Harvard wins, even though he'd been kicked out. He's a Harvard man. All right. Comes back, calls home. He's about to take the train back, and his wife says, "You got to get back here. She's in a coma." Holy, so she's sickly in. So he gets back there. She's in his arms, still in a coma. She opens up her eyes and said, "Daddy, did you bring me back the cane, the pennant?" And he had forgotten. He had forgotten, Dan. She closes her eyes and never wakes up. That would drive a man to drink. That would break you.
Absolutely.
And it did to Bucky. 5 years later, he was basically an alcoholic. He thought his family would be better off without him. And he's going to commit suicide. And when he was sitting there looking, and this is you Google it, Bucky, suicide. You come up there, an article in New Yorker that says it. This is common knowledge for people who know about Bucky Fuller. He said the next thing that happened, he found himself suspended 10 feet in the air, surrounded by dazzling white light. And he heard these words: "Your life is not yours to throw away. What you think is true. If you dedicated your life toward helping your fellow man, I will take care of you." And Bucky said he went into the silence for 2 years. He came out, became that prolific writer, inventor, geodesic dome, C60, all that stuff that we know him to be. All right. And he wrote Critical Path in 1981, talking about what humanity was facing. And he said the collapse of our present institutions is going to be the best thing to happen to humanity. He said the U.S. is bankrupt. The bankruptcy of the U.S. will be followed by the bankruptcy of the other 149 countries, finally freeing humanity from the grip of governments, corporations, and religion. And we'll be free to enjoy the life that we were meant to have.
Yeah, just a lot of people are going to get destroyed in the process.
And that's why you got to just hold on. We're going through a shift. I got this metaphor about it. Yeah, we're headed for the shitter. We're headed for the outhouse. But once you take that cosmic dump, you're going to feel better than you haven't felt in years.
That's like having to vomit.
Just let it out. It's coming to a head. All that greed, hatred, separation, and warfare and domination is the
Well,
crisis is
well-
not something that's caused by humanity.
the
The
problem,
crisis, Bucky said, is caused by the universe. The universe is moving. Now, I'm a hippie. I believe that shit. That's in my blood because of what happened in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and all that meditation. I believe that from the core of my being. I believe that. And so, you know, I've got more faith than I've ever had in my whole life. And as we're headed towards this crisis, I've been reading about this for years. It's not unexpected to me.
Mhm.
And I know, or I don't know that way, but I believe with every core, every fiber of my being, that this is going to turn out for the better for humanity. It's just going to take a bit of getting used to. Till we'll get there.
and the when is the $1 million question, because these things don't always go in our time frame.
They're going to happen real quick. It's going to happen in the next 2 to 3 years.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like the quote from The Sun Also Rises, suddenly and then all at once, or
All at once.
gradually
Yeah,
and
what
then
am
all
I-
at once.
One of my sayings when I wrote in prison about the shift that happened to me, how long it quit, how long it took, how quick it happened.
Well, it's already happening. It's just
It's just-
these last
yeah.
2 years have had drastic things happen.
It's
And-
felt like a decade, right?
Well, in the last 2 years, when
Changes.
COVID hit, it brought every problem to the forefront.
Hmm.
When COVID hit in March 2020, in the next month and a half, economic activity around the world plunged by 45%. Plunged. And unless credit and debt keeps growing, you're in trouble. But no one had seen it plunge, contract by almost 50%. That's why they poured money and gave it to
Yep.
everybody.
Hmm.
That's why they started writing checks. That's why around the world, interest rates went to zero. They didn't care about us, but they knew if the chickens died, there'd be no chickens to sell. So they were forced to do what they did. They had no options.
Hmm.
I was in an interview in 2010. It was on RT, Russian Times, which has been kicked off the internet because they're the only people who talk to people who weren't thinking normally. All right. I was on an interview on the debt in industrialized societies. And who I was on the panel with was Roland Amore, who was director of investments at Oppenheimer and Company.
Oh, wow.
All right. And with Professor Mark, I forget his name, but he was a professor at Brown University. All right.
Couple
And-
of lightweights. Yeah.
Yeah. And they were fighting with each other. They were going, the Wall Street guy and the professor were just at each other. All right. And the guy in the interview said, I let him go at it first. All right. And I raised my hand and he said, let's let Darryl talk. And I said, you know what? I said, everything they're saying is true. The Fed is reacting because they have to.
Hmm.
What the professor is saying is that it is totally unfair and it's unsustainable. I said, but what I believe is going to happen, no one knows, but it's going to be driven by crises. It's not going to be driven by what you want to do or what you think is going to happen.
Hmm.
The choices are going to be driven by the crises of the moment.
Hmm.
That was in 2010. Well, 10 years later, the big crisis came. COVID shut everything down. Nobody could have predicted it. Nobody could have seen it. All right.
Hmm.
But that's what happened. So what you're seeing the Fed do is what they have to do. Everybody's talking about the Fed. Oh, they're raising interest rates. They're going to kill us. The Fed is worried about inflation because they're worried that if inflation continues, it's going to turn into hyperinflation and it's going to destroy the currency.
Hmm.
They won't even use the word hyperinflation because they're so scared of it.
Hmm.
But they know it's possible. And they know the real danger is not so much even hyperinflation, it's hyperdeflation, where it just
Deflation.
stops. Deflation.
That's what's
Hyperdeflation.
coming. That's what's coming.
That's after you may get those both at once, but the difference is I see it. And where if you are, like I say, if you're tied into the present paradigm, and it's hard not to be, because we're all debt slaves on the same plantation. We're all scared that if this shuts down, how are we going to eat? How are we going to live? And that's what my book is
for
about.
the children, Darryl. For the children.
Read my book. It just came out. Dock into the mothership.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, and my belief is this. I know people who read it won't believe it because it's so what it is. But when we're going through it, it will give you the faith and hope that you're going to need in the coming 2 years.
Wow.
Yeah, I do want to talk about you. I do want to talk about your books a little bit more. But first, I just want to answer a question that somebody wanted me to ask you. Would you be buying a house right now, or would you be renting, or what would you be doing if you were like a person in their 30s or a younger person with
Listen,
a family?
everybody wants to own a house because we feel it's one of those human subconscious things that if you got a house, you're more secure.
Mhm.
So let me tell you, for most people, that mortgage is going to be an anchor tied to their waist, holding them below water.
It would be like Rome, where they just walk away.
Yes.
There you go, Mr. Banker. Here's the keys.
Yes. I don't talk about this stuff a lot because of what I see as possible. I mean, 15 years ago, we go to parties and Martha would say, don't talk about this stuff. Everyone was just, they would have a good time.
Right. You don't want to
Here
freak them.
comes
You don't.
Darryl.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
yeah. I
Daryl.
mean, sometimes the
know?
truth hurts,
Yeah,
right?
you're-
And it freaks you
pretty-
out sometimes, right?
Yeah, pretty soon they're drinking twice as much as they were. And,
Yeah. The whole
because,
bottle.
yeah, the whole bottle.
Daryl's here. It's
Daryl's
the
here.
whole bottle of
The
tequila.
whole bottle. But I believe I am an op, but I've never shied away from what I see is possible. That's why Marshall hated me writing Time of the Vulture. He said, and in fact, when I gave my presentation to PDN, you couldn't believe there was money in that room. I mean, there was money in that room. The other positive deviants. And one guy stood up and said, give us some hope. It was so reactive. You know what Martha said? We were leaving, the feedback was so intense. She said, I don't care if we see any of these people again in our lives. We got over it.
Wow.
But it was pretty pitched when I when I made my presentation.
Wow.
And I wasn't trying to bum anybody else. I was just saying what I saw was happening.
You were just calling it as you saw
I was
it, right?
calling as I saw it. And that book was bought in 25 different countries. It established my reputation for this thing. And it ended, and I'm not saying anything different now than I did then. That the belief that a better world was coming was at the end of the book. A belief in a better world was
Well,
coming.
there are
Which is what the
cycles,
hippies
there are
did.
seasons, right?
There's cycles and there's seasons. That's right. And what, when we're through this, which will be quicker than we think, but it's going to be more intense than we think. When we're through this phase, we're going to look back on it and go, wow. I never, just like COVID, I never would have expected it. And we're going to feel so much better, but we've got to get through it. It's like Bucky had to get through that period. It's like I had to get through those 10 years in prison.
Yeah.
We got to
Yeah.
we will,
Mhm.
because this is going to drive us inside ourselves till we find who we really are. Right now, we think we're these little ego fragments, separate, that when we die, it's all over. No, the game is so much bigger than that. We are living in a world of rational superstitions, and I say that with every with everything I believe, with everything I've gone through. I know that we are something. Jesus, this theory of the guy, you know what he said? That nobody ever believed. Nobody ever believed it. The statement that Jesus said that everybody disregarded was, ye are gods. Greater things than I have done, ye shall do also. And you know what our reaction was? Fuck you, homie. We're pieces of shit, and you were so holy, you had to die to save our ass. That's what the church is telling us.